people of the internet community. This is your 6-year resident, Tamara May, and I'm going to keep it at that, actually, because I've outgrown the nickname Tommy by like 4 years. Today, this is a book review on the documentation of the serial killer, the Iceman, aka Richard Kuklins. I can never pronounce his fucking... This is supposed to be a school project. I can never pronounce his last name. There we go. That's better. I had plot points for what I was originally going to discuss. But to keep it frank, I lost them. So, I remember most of the plot anyways, which is going to be good but bad, because there's going to be a lot of awkward pauses in this video, you know? Same as usual. I started painting my cat, as you could see from my previous 3 minutes worth of videos. He's on the bed. He's stinky. His name is Benny. Anyways. So, the Iceman. I should probably have the actual book with me. Give me a minute. Give me a minute. Got it. So, Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman. The one and only mafia killer who killed multiple people. What the fuck else would you assume? Kill count is calculated to be over 60. So that's pretty obvious. I think the number was 63 in the book. 63 and up, but I don't quite remember, and I don't remember what page it was on either. And I'm too lazy to read and find out. Anyways. So the book starts off with a slight blurb on what he's like. He's a family man. He has 2 daughters, 1 son, and 1 wife that he loves with bunches. Bunches? A lot. And then the last line to the opening blurb is literally like, I think it's, give me a minute, I have terrible memory and I haven't read this in too long. That's not it. His family never suspected a thing. There we go. Up until his arrest, his wife Barbara and his 2 children had never expected a single thing. They expected him to be a typical family man who ran his own business instead of apartments, who spoiled his children a lot. Anna, I believe, was his favorite daughter. Said daughter loved Richard bunches. The other daughter, who I cannot remember the name of again for like the 5th time. I have terrible memory. I should have at least done a skim over of this. Hated him, however. Yeah. So, she even went as far as to start having sexual relations at about the age of 13, and I believe she lost her virginity to someone who was like in his 20s. I'm talking about stuff that's halfway through the book. I haven't even started the beginning yet. Well, I did technically, but now I'm jumping ahead like a lot. Spoiler alert! Anyways, this is how all of my YouTube content goes. Anyways, the book starts off with introducing his mother, who I believe he named his first daughter after, whose name I also believe was Anna. That'll take me like 2 seconds to find. That's way further down the road. Well, not way further down the road. Basically, his mother is an orphan who lived in a Catholic orphanage in the 20s, because he was born in 37. Yes, Richard Kuklinski was born in 1937, if my memory is correct. His mother's name was Anna McNally, and she grew up in the Sacred Orphanage on Erie and 9th Streets. Her origins were in Dublin, and they immigrated there in 1904. This is a documentary book. And they had moved to the 10th largest city in America at the time, New Jersey. This is completely off topic, and I'm already 5 minutes into the video. Guess we're making it to 10. Blah, 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 blah. And then it introduces Anna's wife, Stanley. Stanley was Richard's abusive drunk father, and Stanley ended up killing off Richard's older brother, who he considered his biggest friend, Florian, by beating him aggressively over the head in an abusive outrage. Now, Florian had been a weak kid because they were malnourished and everything, because it was late Depression. Late Great Depression. Stanley had, they got away with it with the cops by saying that Florian had fallen down the stairs, and after that day, Richard hated his father for the rest of his life. They were both very scared of him, for the good while, but Richard now hated his father and no longer saw him as his father. We'll get into that later. After his dad killed Florian, Stanley ended up letting up on Richard for a good while. Stanley's beatings were more frequent, blah, 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 blah. Brings up Richard in an aggressive way. Richard grew up to be tall-ish and had 2 other younger siblings. A sister, and a brother. The brother proceeded to go down the same path as Richard. My stutter always acts up in these. Which was not fun. And a lot of the time, Richard was bullied as a kid for being a Polak, because little did I forget to mention, because I have the brain of I have a hollow brain, there we go. Richard was bullied by an Irishman named O'Brien because he was Polish on his father's side, and it showed very well in his features, apparently. As back then he was considered very attractive. Anytime Richard went to stand up to O'Brien and his posse would end up beating Richard to an absolute pulp. And that was the only time that Stanley would stand up for his son. And one time he had leaped out of their apartment window and slapped the child across the face. Excellent parenting. 11 out of 10, you know? Not Richard, O'Brien. And I'm just going to describe up to his first murder, because a lot of words, a long book, and I already kind of jumped ahead. But his first murder was when he was about in 8th grade, I believe. And it was after Stanley. Stanley had left with another woman at this point, leaving Anna to raise Richard, his brother, and his sister alone. Richard was actually tempted later on in his life to kill his father, and interviews have said that he severely regretted that choice. You know, like anyone does. Anna ended up moving to a new apartment because she ended up getting a different job from the one she was in previously. So they weren't in slums anymore. They had an actual apartment complex that didn't have... I have paint all over my fingers. So they ended up living in an actual apartment. Dumb Polak was still a frequent insult for Richard, which made him very enraged. The Project Boys, which was O'Brien's gang, constantly belittled, bullied, and physically assaulted Richard in his younger years, and Richard one day just snapped. He was a loner when he was younger too, Richard was, so what a typical backstory, you know? Where all the cliches come from. Richard's brother, no, that's not important, actually. Apparently their Uncle Mickey was the closest thing they had to a father at the time, but he had children of his own, so he still wasn't around that much, and he also lived across the bay in the richer parts of town because he wasn't broke. Anyways, the Project Boys ended up beating the absolute hell out of Richard one day when he tried to stand up to them. So Richard ended up cornering O'Brien that night in an alleyway. And when O'Brien tried to lay a hit on Richard, because he'd never seen Richard to anything but a weakling at that point, Richard took a rusty metal pipe from the side of the alleyway and beat O'Brien over the head with it, to the point where the 8th grader, I'd say around about, passed away. Richard stole a car and drove O'Brien to the river there, and so he weighed his body down and dumped him in the river to sink. He was never caught until his confession after his official arrest, and I am running out of time, so bye.